Okay, so it's our last lesson for our final test. We've got some unit tests posted here. So what I suggest you do, if your group was able to successfully get one of the tests to pass, is go and grab the other copies of the other two tests, add them to your solution, and see if you can get all three of the edit tests to pass. The one your group wrote, and then take two of the other tests for describing the other two scenarios and add them to your project. So I'm going to take, so Ryan and Hemant and Haywan, you guys wrote this invalid with no ID. So we passed in null, and then we expect to get back the error view. So I'm going to add this to my project, and I'll see if I can run this test, if it's going to pass. So I'll go to my store manager controller. I'll put on a comment. This is the section for the edit test using get. Okay, so in my controller, we change the action result to a view result. And now my unit test looks okay. We'll try running the test and see what happens. So I'll run my new test. Which passes, which is good. And now we can see where this took our code coverage, because we were at 0% before I put in this unit test. So again, in my controller, we changed the return type of edit to a view result. So we're at 8%. We've covered one possibility. We get no ID, so we've gone from 0 to 8. So that's a start. So Josh, your group basically had the same test. So it should pass as well. Okay, so Jesse will try your valid test. Throw that in here. So if we pass in an ID that's valid, let's see what happens. So I'll run that test. Okay. So I can see two issues with our test. One is, it says it's expecting the index view. When a user clicks on edit in our web application and passes in a valid ID, what's the name of the view that we're expecting? Yeah, we should be loading the edit view. When I have a few too many things open here. So I just got to log back in. No, I don't. I'm already logged in. So when I go to Store Manager, and click edit, if I have a valid ID, it should load the edit view. So the first change we need to make here, and we can see in the other one, right? So you guys had it. That's right, that we're checking, we should be checking the edit view. That's what we expect, not create. So that's the first thing. Although we can see if we look at our error message, we actually got back nothing. The name of that view is actually empty. So if I run the test again, it's still not going to pass. So it's now we're expecting edit, but we got back an empty. So the unit test is actually okay. The problem isn't in our unit test. We have to change one thing here. What do we change to get that test to pass here? So it's saying that the view name that comes back is empty. How can we specify the name of the view? We've already done it in here. We specified the names of the views in these two conditions. So what should we add to line 134? Yeah. So when we return the view, first we'll supply the name, and then the second we'll supply the data that comes back with it. We didn't have to do this before because originally our method returned an action result. That feature was built in with action result. When we change it to view result, we need to actually specify the name of the view. So now our test should pass, which it does. So we're returning, we're specifying the name first, so we've added this little bit of code in blue. And we had to change, in the unit test, we had to change create to edit. So there's two of our three tests. So we've dealt with no ID, we've dealt with a valid ID. And now we've got an invalid ID. So let's try that one. In your test, you're passing in an ID that doesn't exist because in our mock data, we only have ID 1, 2, and 3. And we're saying if we pass in an ID that doesn't exist in our list, we should get redirected to the error view. So now we can run this one. Okay, so now all our tests pass. So the 3 edit tests are almost identical to the 3 details tests because we have the same 3 possibilities. We have a valid ID and we get an album. We have an ID, but there's no matching album, or we have no ID. So our unit tests for edit and details should be almost the same, really. So now the question is, what did this do for our code coverage? Where are we? For details, we wrote those 3 tests and we were at 100%. Blue. So let's see where we get now. So we're almost there with edit. Why are we at 96%? We said we had the same 3 possibilities. We've written basically the same 3 unit tests, but details were at 100%. Edit, we're at 97, which is really good. Right?
Make sure that the proper album is loaded and not the view.
Right. So we've got these 2 other lines of code here. We're setting the view bag equal to the list of artists, and the genre is equal to the list of genres. So to try and get closer to 100%, we probably should unit test these as well. Now we could just do those right in here. If we have a valid ID, we could write multiple assert statements. Assert the view is called edit, assert that the view bag is an empty, For genre, if you assert that the view bag isn't empty for artist. Problem is that's not really a great way of doing it, because if our test fails, we don't know which of those three, did all three things fail? Did one of them fail? We don't know. So we're probably best to write separate unit tests for these two things as well. So we're going to add two more tests here. So we're going to check that the list of artists that we're expecting is valid. Problem is we don't have a list of artists, I don't think. Because this uses our, well, let's see. We may have to leave this out for now. Otherwise, we're going to be doing a lot more setup. Let's see. Oh, no, maybe we're okay. We'll try it and see. So we'll just make up a list of two artists. So now we'll call our details method again. We may have to change this a little bit. We're going to pass in a valid ID. And then we'll check that the lists of artists in the view bag, not sure we even need this. We'll see. We may be able to do that without this. Let's just see if our test passes. Okay, so it says the view bag is not empty. So I don't think we need that. And then we'll run a similar test for the genres, exactly the same, except we're just checking the genre ID property in the view bag and make sure it's not null. That may not get us quite to 100%, but it's going to be close enough. Good enough for today. After this, we'll check our coverage. Exact same code, we're just checking genre ID instead of artist ID this time. So our tests all pass. Yep, so now we're at 100%. So we needed those 2 extra unit tests. If we turn on our code coloring, well, it says this is yellow, but it's blue in the controller now. So we've gone from 0% coverage here to 100%. And we can make sure we haven't broken anything in our web application. Again, we can try the 3 scenarios: a valid ID, an invalid ID, and a missing ID. So when our ID is valid, we should get our album. When our ID is invalid, we get an error. And when we have no ID, again, we get an error. So this time we needed 5 unit tests. Josh?
So, sorry, this is kind of a question from last week, but I was wondering, would we create repositories, like if we were doing this in an actual production environment, would you want to like each controller, or would you try to consolidate like all of your?
No, you'd need a set way. In effect, you need 2 repositories for each controller, right? You need the mock one. Right, this is the mock one for just doing unit testing with the fake data. And then you need the real one that actually works with the database and does create, read, update, and delete in the database. So you'd need 2 repositories. Now, what you may want to do from an architecture point of view is you might create subfolders in the model. Like you might make a mock repository subfolder, and then the EF repository subfolder, and put them in there. So it's more organized.
Now, you want to create like, could you create a repository for like the entire database connection, or would you want to split it up like you're doing?
You would definitely want to split it up. It will get far too unwieldy if everything was in that one file. Part of the whole reason we're using MVC is we want that separation of concerns. The labor. So the idea of keeping all our logic in one file, something we want to try to avoid. Raj, did you have a question as well? No? Okay. Okay, now we have so there's our edit. Now we haven't dealt with the post version. So right now we can load the edit page, but we can't actually save anything. So let's deal with this one. So right below in our controller, here's our post method. I'm going to uncomment everything that's here. We can have a look at what we're going to need to do in order to properly test this. So we'll have to change some stuff here. First thing we're going to need to change are obviously where we're getting the red lines. So we're just going to comment that code out. That was our original scaffolded code. And here's our new repository code. So the save has been moved to this file. If we're using the database, and when we're mocking, we just call this kind of pretend save method that doesn't really save anything. So that gets rid of our first error. So we need to write a few unit tests to try and successfully test the possibilities. We're not going to get to 100% on this, and here's why. We're not really going to be able to properly unit test this, because the only way we can get, this is our file upload. When we're editing, we're adding a new album cover. We can't really do this without a browser, so we have no way to actually just unit test that function. So our code, when we do our unit tests and we turn on our code coverage, this is always going to show in red. So we'll just have to keep that in mind. So let's write our first test, which is when everything works fine. User edits something, like they change the price of an album and they hit save. We're going to need a number of unit tests for when we're doing a post in the edit section. The first one we're going to want to test is when edit is actually successful. Now this time, remember, we have two versions of edit. The version we were calling before, we send in an ID. That's when we're loading the edit form. The second version is actually we're sending in not an ID, it's the whole album object. That's when we're processing the update. So in this case, we could maybe send in, I don't know, albums. We could send in the first album. Whoops, albums dot to list. So we're going to send in the first album. Actually, wait a minute, maybe this will work. The problem is our method sends back an action result. Now in our other edit, we change that to send back a view result. That isn't going to work this time. We used a view result before because no matter what the possibility was, we always returned a view. If we had no ID, we returned a view. If we had no album, we returned a view. If it all worked, we returned a different view. So we changed action result to view result. We can't do that here. We need to keep this as action result. Why is that? There's one line of code here that isn't going to work where we're not returning a view result. What happens in the browser if I make a change? So if I change the price here and click save, what's going to happen after it updates the database? Yeah, it'll take us back to the home page, right? I'm not going to stay here after it saves my change. Well, my code's commented out right now, but it should take me back. So which line, what line number takes us back to the home page? Yeah, the redirect to action. So we can't redirect to action. If I change this to view result, it's going to break that line. Now it says, nope, you can't do that. This method is supposed to load a view, not redirect to another view. So we can't keep that as we have to keep that as an action result. The action result is like a parent class. So it allows us to load a view. It allows us to redirect to a different page. It allows us to send back JSON. So the way we fix this is by converting this result that comes back as an action result into a view result. So we just do it like this. Error goes away. So take the object comes back and change it into the object that we want. We are casting the action result to a view result. And now we're going to check. Whoops, view result isn't what we want, sorry. It's redirect to root result, because we're doing a redirect in this case. Not loading a view directly, we're loading a different page. But this is how we can check that our method redirects, and it redirects to the page we're expecting it to. We can try this unit test and see if we can get it to pass. When we do a deletion or a create, they're all going to do the same thing. In each case, after we change the database, add, edit, or delete, we're going to redirect back to the index view. Okay. We broke something. So something that was working previously, we've now broken. And that's actually up here. So now when we're passing in null, it doesn't know which version of edit we're calling. Are we passing the one with the ID where we're calling get, or are we passing in one where it's expecting an album for editing? It says the call is ambiguous. Which version of edit are we trying to run here? So we need to make one little change here. So we'll create an ID that's an integer. And if we pass in a null integer, it now knows that's the get version. Error goes away. So I've added my arrange statement all to an ID. So we are passing in an integer. That integer has no value. It's null. So I'm going to run all my tests and hope that my new test passes now, which it doesn't. So it's throwing an error in our edit method in our controller because of this. This request doesn't exist when we're unit testing. We actually need an HTTP request or this object throws an error. So we're going to move this whole block inside of another if statement. If our request is not null. Move all that code in there. That should fix this error that shows up when we try to test this method. So this code should get ignored when we're unit testing. So now I'll run my test again, it should pass. So if we pass in a valid album, it saves and takes us back to the index view. So that one test covers about 15%. So this stuff in blue is now covered. This we are never going to get covered by a unit test. That's okay. Not the end of the world. So now we've got a few other things we can test. If our model is not valid, so this is what happens if we get a valid album. It saves and it redirects. This is what happens if there's some kind of error. It means the user is kept on the edit page again. It reloads the artist, the genre, and reloads the view. So we need to test these conditions. So first we can test the artists and genres again. Edit. Save. The long unit test name. When we try to save an album and we have an invalid model, we want to make sure our drop-down list of artists is still there. Now give me a second. I want to make sure I do it properly. We're going to deliberately set the model for testing to invalid. So we're setting this up to trigger so that it won't try to save. Something's wrong with the data. We'll take the first album in our list, we'll pass it in, and we'll call edit. We want to make sure if the user stays on this page that they haven't our list of artists is still available. And if this works, we want to do the exact same thing and just check the genre ID in a separate test. So our test passes. Before I check the code coverage, I'll do the exact same thing and just change artists to genres. Change the name of the test and change the name of the view bag property we're checking. Because we got two lists on the page, an artist list and a genre list. We want to make sure both of them are filled. So all our tests are passing. So we're up to 60% coverage. So the only thing that's not covered is the processing of a file upload. As I said, it's kind of hard for us to unit test that one because we really need a browser. We need an HTTP request. It's interesting that this shows as blue. We still should write one more unit test to increase that. Still want to make sure it loads the edit view. I'll call it edit, save, invalid, loads, edit view. Very long name. We'll use the same arrange statement where we set up an error. We set our view result, and then we're going to make sure that the view result is actually called edit. We want to make sure what we get, we stay on the right page. And that page has a list of genres and a list of artists. So I, again, just copied the previous two unit tests, changed the name, and I changed what we're checking in the assert statement. Okay. We saw this error earlier. It's expecting a view called edit, but the name of the view was empty. How did we fix this before? Our unit test is okay. We have to change something in our controller. We had this issue with edit before. You can watch what happens, and that should help us figure out where we have to change it. Edit, model state is not valid. It grabs the view bag, grabs the artists, grabs the genres, and it returns the view here. So here's our view result, but the name is actually empty. You can see down at the bottom here, there's no name being filled out. So how can we specify the name of the view we want to load? Daniel? Yeah, where would we specify the name? Yeah, on which line? You're right. Yeah, so on 173, we'll specify, again, that it's the edit view that we're loading. If the data they give us is invalid, we want to load the page again until it's correct. So that fixes our test by adding that little highlighted section to our return statement. So we still have all this red stuff in here. We're going to have to live with that. So it's still at 60%. which is okay. Not great, good enough for today. So we've tested index, we've tested details, we've tested edit, both the get and post. We've tested delete. Sure you should. We'll come back to that. So let's actually finish delete. That's weird. We have the unit test, but my code's commented out. Let's do delete, see if we have time to write all the tests we need for both delete and create. They're going to be similar to what we've done. So we did these tests last week. The tests pass, but my code here was commented out. I'm going to uncomment it in my get delete. We're going to make the same changes here we already made with edit and details. What should happen if the ID is null? What do we want to return? Yeah, let's return which view. We try to delete something with no ID. Yeah. Right, we'll return the error view. Same on the next line. Rather than returning an HTTP status, let's return the error page. We need to change our find. Now our delete method works. So we change the two errors to return view error, and we change the find to use first or default. And we wrote all these methods last week that should run. So I think we really just have create to do. So in our store manager controller now, we're doing pretty well. We've actually covered 79% of the code in here. We've covered our index, that the page loads and that it actually displays albums. We've checked editing, all the possibilities, both when we're first editing and when we're updating. And we've done all the tests for deleting and confirming the deletion. So a good part of our code in here is blue. Great. This one is red. This one's always going to be red. Why can't we unit test that one? That section in red, what's it doing? What's going on there? Right. So we looked at this last week, right? We said we created a controller. It could do one of two things. If we gave it a mock object, it just uses our pretend data. If it gets nothing passed to it, it uses the real database. So that's what's happening here. When nothing comes in, we're connecting to the database. So we can't unit test that because we're trying to unit test away from our database. So that one's always going to stay red. We'll never quite get to 100%. That's okay. So index is blue, details blue, edit, aside from our file upload. This is interesting. Why is it telling us that this stuff is not tested?
Post for delete again.
Well, I thought we did, right. Okay. So what you need to do now is the same as you did before in the forum, right? Again, we've got 3 scenarios for delete. We have no ID. We have an ID, but that ID is not found in the database. Or finally, we have a valid ID. So I'll just make a note here. So ID is missing. Turn error. In this case, ID provided, no match found. And the last scenario is ID provided and matching album found. So just like you wrote 1 unit test in your group before for edit, and you either had no ID, valid ID, or invalid ID, I want you to write 1 more unit test for delete and post it on the forum. You do it again as a group. So 1 test between the group. You shouldn't need more than 10 minutes. So write your 1 unit test and put it in the class forum. Once you've posted, or the people at your table, you've posted a unit test, you can take 2 of the other unit tests. So you have 3 for delete. You're close. Okay, so what else do we have to do?
Change to a view result instead of that.
Right. So in our controller, because we're returning views every time, we can change our delete method to return a view result. There's no redirect. It's always the error view or the delete view. All right, that looks good, Ryan. Great, that one passes. So that gives us 20% coverage in our method. That one looks good too. That one should pass. So that one's the same. It looks good. Hey, Tatiana, I'm going to try yours. Going to throw it in my solution. See what happens. So here we've got a valid ID, so we should okay. So it's expecting the view called delete. So if the name that comes back is empty, how do we fix that? Yep. Yeah, which line number? Right, so in here we're going to specify. Because again, we changed the return type to view result. When we leave it as action result, the view is the exact same as the method. If we change it to view result, we need to specify the actual name of the view to load. So if we run our test again now, it should pass. Which does. So that's good. Thank you for that test. So there was our valid ID test. Pass in a number we know exists and make sure that it takes us to the delete page. So we've covered 91% of the code in here. So we just need this where we have an ID, but that ID doesn't exist in our database. So we need a unit test from somebody for an invalid ID with delete. We've got no ID, no ID, no ID. Anybody written a test with an invalid ID? It's going to be pretty similar to our invalid ID. We would just have to change one thing here. What would we change in this test? I only have to change one word here. Well, I guess two words. To name the test differently, and what else do we change? Yeah, change null to, what would we change null to? Yeah, we could just give it 4 because we only have IDs 1, 2, and 3 in our mock. So we can grab that one. We could just call this one invalid ID. Instead of passing in null, we'll pass in an ID we know doesn't exist. So this should cover all of the possibilities in delete and put us up to 100%. So we passed. And we've covered all three possibilities. Same as details and edit. Valid ID, invalid ID, no ID. So our delete is now at 100%. We check our color coding, it's all blue. Everything that could possibly happen when we call this method, we have a unit test for. Now our code coverage is high here, but that's because our two create methods are commented out. Here's the get method. Let's uncomment this one. How many unit tests do we need for this create method? How many things should we be checking? So this would be a user comes to our store manager. Which I may have taken offline. I may have to restart. There. Oh, whoop. So how many tests should we write when this happens? What things should we be checking? How many things are happening here? Yeah, 3. What 3 things should we check? We'll need 3 unit tests. That we have the artists, that we have the genres, not index, what view should load? Yeah, the create view loads. So we need 3 tests to check these 3 things. The first thing we want to make sure is that the artists load. We're going to call create. So we've got a couple of options here. We can either change this to a view result. We can also just convert the result to a view result. We want to make sure we get a list of artists when that page loads. We then want another unit test that's exactly the same, where we're testing for the genres. And then our third test is that the actual name of the view is create. And we need test method at the top. For second test, we'll just change artist to genre. And it should pass our first two tests. Which it does. So now we need to test this line too. We've checked that each drop down is going to be filled properly. The last thing we just want to make sure is that it loads the proper page. Actually, in this case, we can just do it this way to get the name a little simpler. Hold on a minute. No, sorry, I'll put that back. So we said we need three checks. We're checking the artist, we're checking the genres, and we're checking that we get the right page loaded. And we get an error. For the same issue in create, when we return the view, we need to specify the name that we're returning. We'll just go back here. In our return statement, we'll specify that we're returning the create view. So I can run these three tests right from here. So now it passes. So this code should all be blue and we should have 100% coverage in here. So we're at 100%. Everything's blue. So overall, it says we're at 90%. Although we still have one method that's commented. And that's our create post, actually saving a new artist. So for this one, we basically need the same tests we had for edit. We save correctly, or our model's invalid, and we stay on the create page, in which case we need to check the artist and genre again. I think for edit, save, we did 4 unit tests. We basically need those same 4 unit tests for create. So the first thing we're going to need to do is put this in an if statement. We only do this if we have a request. So here's our old scaffold code. For commenting out. So we're going to use our repository. And again, when we return the view, we better specify the name. So this is if the model is invalid and we're keeping the user on the create page because they got to try again. Rather than rewrite all of our unit tests, we can take these 4 edit save unit tests, copy, paste, and just modify them. So we wrap this in an if statement. We took out the old code and replaced it with our new save, and we've added the name of the view into our method. Those are our changes. So I'm going to go back to my test class. And I'll find this section here that says post edit, where I've got my 4 methods edit save that start with the word edit save. So I'm going to copy those and then basically just modify those to use our create. So starting with the first one that says edit save, I'm going to copy those 4 methods down to the bottom. And I can see where my section ends because then it says get delete here. I've copied those. I'll go right down to the bottom and put in a section for post. Okay. I'll paste those and Visual Studio will complain it doesn't like the names because obviously we've got methods with the same names. So the first one I'm going to call create, save valid. And here, instead of calling edit, we call create. So if we successfully add a new album, we'll expect to get redirected back to the index view. Our second one is create. We're just going to change the word edit in the name and change the word edit in the method. Same here. I'll create again. And once again, make sure when the create loads that we've got our genres still there. And in our last one, we're going to call create. If it fails, it means the user is going to stay once again on the create view. So I just changed all the instances of edit to create in those 4 methods. I don't think I had to change anything else. So there are 4 new tests. So they all passed. So our create, it says that's 61% because of the file upload, which we can't really test. But overall in our controller, with all our code enabled, we've covered 85% of our code. So we've got basically just 3 blocks. Our 2 file upload blocks in red. Everything else is blue, which is great. And then at the top, where we're trying to connect to our database, obviously we don't have that covered because can't unit test that. But all of our create, read, update, delete methods, now we've unit tested all of them successfully. So a few of these unit tests are in our first controller. How many did we write? We wrote a few last week here. So in here, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So in order to do all the create, read, update, delete methods in one controller, we'd actually need to write 27 unit tests. But those tests would be similar from one controller to another. Okay? You don't have to do 27 unit tests for the rest of assignment 2. I already posted on Blackboard the ones that you do need. So I posted it last week, but just to review before I end off for today. So here are the unit tests you need. So you only need 8 unit tests, and you only need to do it in one of your controllers. You don't have to do it on both of your controllers. But you do need to add the 2 repositories, one for mock data, one for live data, and you need to install the mock package in your unit test project. So that your solution still runs, you can just comment out the edit, create, and delete methods in the controller. Because if those are there, once we add the repositories, those are going to break. So you can just disable those for part 2. That's fine. So just those 8 should be in your controller. All right, that's all for today.